tell you about this back when all of the debates were about inclusive language. And this song was one that a lot of people particularly struggled with because of the Lord line. And there was a whole issue about this Lord male language. And you know, I'm a feminist, and I understand that. But somebody took it for me and turned it on its head and helped me to understand what's so unusual about what we as Christians believe. And that is that we follow a Lord who didn't win power and might through military means, didn't win it through being in control of everybody else or any title or official provenance that he was given. He did it through servitude and death. And that's why saying that Jesus is Lord is so powerful and significant for us as the people of God. Because we are claiming a lordship, a power and authority that doesn't come through the traditional means, but comes through an entirely upside down lordship of being willing to be servant of all and to die for all. Now that's pretty powerful stuff. It's pretty powerful to believe that we don't have to have military might, that we don't have to have authority by virtue of title or any of that, that we can become Lord by becoming servant. And that's exactly what it means when we sing this. We were going to sing it a few weeks ago, Spanky, and we kind of got delayed on it, but I was glad that I at least got to offer the chorus, and today we got to do the verse. But that's a song that's always taken me back to the fact that when we say Jesus Christ is Lord, we're making a pretty radical and powerful statement. Amen? When you came in this morning, if you got one, and I think most everybody did, Mary does a good job of that, but we were handing out these bulletins this week which had an insert. We don't do inserts that often, but it announces a hymn sing that we're going to have on April 28th, which is the 5th Sunday of the month. And in months that we have 5 Sundays, we're going to be doing something different on our 5th Sunday. And we're going to do a hymn sing. When you came in, you may have noticed something new on your pew if you were lucky enough to get 1 or 2 of them this week, and that was a hymnal. Thank you, David and Sam, for bringing to us a collection of hymnals that I guess came from Open Door, came from somewhere, and have been sitting under your desk for a while, and so we now have some hymnals in the congregation. We don't often have a pianist, but we will have one that Sunday, and we're going to be doing a hymn sing. Now, for those of you Baptists, Pentecostals, other folks like that have been to hymn sings before, you know that usually at a hymn sing, you sit there with your hymnal and you flip through and you find the hymn you like and you say, I want to sing number 300 or something. We're not doing quite that version on the 28th because we want to have some pre-nominations for this pianist because she comes out of a Baptist tradition and she wants to know the hymns that are being nominated so she can at least, make a list of the ones that work. So ahead of time, if you will use these little blue forms and fill them out and look through the hymnal, you can do it while I'm preaching today. That's okay, I won't mind. And look for hymns that you want to sing. We've got a couple of Sundays to do this and put them on here. And then David and I are going to sit down together and kind of weave them together and turn them into a service for the 28th. But we look forward to doing something a little different than doing a hymn sing. Amen. I know for some of you, probably like me, you'd love to have hymn singing every Sunday. Yeah. And would love to go back to those hymnals. For me, it was the Broadman, which has not been in Baptist churches for at least 4 decades now, but that's what people still think of when they think of the Baptist hymnal. It's the Broadman. And there were hymns in there that I knew by heart by the time I was 10 years old that nobody sings anymore. But we're going to, that Sunday, use the hymnal that we have to do some hymn singing. And I pray that, that you will enjoy this and that you'll have an opportunity to look through it ahead of time. I also want to just encourage you, if there are songs that you would like to include in our worship every Sunday, songs that are particularly meaningful to you, and particularly because of the way that we do worship that you can find on YouTube that have words with them, that have lyrics that come up on the screen when you're going through the YouTube. If you don't know what YouTube is, somebody here will explain it to you. But that's what you're looking at most of the time when you're doing worship here. If you have something you want to nominate, I'm sure Donna would be open to nominations. Now, we try to do things that are in an alto tenor range because 2 of our praise team members currently are altos and tenors, and it's easier for them to pick up and to sing the songs that are in that alto, tenor, baritone range. For me, a bass, it's sometimes a little hard to sing some of the songs. I have to switch between octaves a lot between them. For soprano, some of them may be hard. If we had a larger praise team, praise God, we could probably sing some of the other ones. So if anybody would like to be a part of the praise team, Donna, would you just kind of wave to people or stand up, talk to Donna, and we're looking at expanding our praise team a little as we get into the new year. So we'll have a chance to expand our music. But if you have something that you want to sing on another Sunday, I encourage you to talk to Donna and just recommend it. Ideally, let her know what the reference is in YouTube so that she can go from there. Probably when you heard the scripture being read this morning, especially if you were here last week, you wondered if I maybe slipped a little bit or lost my mind, because it sounded like we were reading last week's scripture this Sunday as well. Last week we heard the story from the Gospel according to John, and this week we heard it from the Gospel according to Luke. And it had something very, very much in common. When Jesus comes to a crowd of disciples and says to them immediately, "Peace be with you," because they were very frightened. In this version it says that they thought he was a ghost. And if you had a ghost walk into the middle of your group, you probably would be a little frightened too. Dead things are supposed to stay dead. Amen. And here's this one that you heard was crucified, that you saw being crucified, and suddenly they're showing up and you wouldn't recognize them. You know, last week we talked about the times that Jesus said, "Peace be with you." First, he spoke peace to their fears. Secondly, he spoke peace to their growing faith, to the understanding of who they were going to be. And finally, he spoke peace to the divisions they had, the division between Thomas and the rest of the disciples, the divisions where some of them were just a little ahead and some were a little behind. And Jesus said, "You ain't seen nothing yet, because in a few years there are going to be people that believe in me that never even met me. And so you need to start working together, and I pray peace into the midst of that even before it happens." That's the way that Jesus works. He prays peace into the midst of conflict and fears and a growing sense of ministry and purpose even before those occasions occur. Jesus preaches and gives us the opportunity for peace even when there seems to be no peace. Resurrection changes everything. This resurrection that Jesus has made possible, that Jesus has illustrated, begins to make changes. And even in these few days that after Jesus' initial resurrection, changes start to happen among and around the disciples, and they're aware of it. In the scripture today, resurrection brings up three particular points that I want to give you today. And I'm proud of this list because I came up with it myself, so I hope you'll like it. Resurrection, first of all, changes appearances or changes revelations. Kenny Callahan, who is the new pastor of MCC Richmond and just a firecracker, I really like the guy, is now our coach for church revitalization for 4 of the churches in the southeastern United States. And he was originally, I believe, a Lutheran pastor from California and has done church revitalization almost his entire career. Now he's in MCC and he's volunteered to be a coach and coach some of us on revitalization. But he said something this week that I've never really noticed before. Nobody who sees Jesus in this time that's reflected recognizes who he is. Now that would be, do any of you have the problem that nobody recognizes who you are? You go into a group of people and they don't remember ever having met you before. That always just kind of irks me that it happens, you know. I don't know how it happens with me because I'm kind of tall and I used to be kind of blonde. And, you know, I would hope that I would stand out. But people just don't remember who you were. They don't remember having met you. But in this case, it's a little more severe because we're talking about people that have followed Jesus, that have been with Jesus, that have intimately been taught by Jesus, that have cried with Jesus and laughed with Jesus and sat at the same table, and yet nobody seems to recognize him. First of all, Mary and Peter and the other disciple, and then the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, and now finally when he's meeting here with the 11 plus others, and the others probably included a number of women and maybe even some other men, none of them recognized Jesus. When they first saw Jesus there, they didn't recognize him. Now, it could be, like I said before, because people expect dead things to stay dead. And, you know, you're a living thing, and we were expecting Jesus to be gone. We heard that he had been resurrected, but not in a literal sense, and yet here you are standing with us. Or could it be that resurrection changes the appearance of Jesus? Could it be that when things start to be revitalized and resurrected, they just don't look the same anymore? I would suggest that that's true. And I would say to you who have been around the people in this room, that when resurrection starts happening in their lives, they may not look like they used to. They may not act like they used to. They may not be the people that you thought they were. And I'm sorry to say, but we Christians want people to stay the way they were, don't we? You know, if they were so-and-so, we want them to stay as so-and-so. If they were sweet and dependable and quiet, it would be nice if they would stay sweet and dependable and quiet. You know, that's just the best way for people to be. When people start getting, you know, noisy and loud and making demands on the rest of us, we're not fond of that. You know, we want them to just stay the way they were. When church doesn't look the way that it used to, you know, even if we want to see it grow, we want it to grow just like it was before. We want, you know, I always laughed at people who would, I shouldn't say laughed at people, but I was laughing. People would come to UCC Baltimore and they would see that we were now singing off of a screen and we were singing different music, often black gospel music, and that just wasn't what they were used to. And they'd say, well, NCC Baltimore's changed. And I'd say, yeah, most of the world has. You know, I've been back to First Baptist Marietta, Georgia a couple of times, and they had in one of their services a screen and a band and all the things that people were complaining about MCC Baltimore having. You know, they still had the other service that had the organ and all that, but it had a full orchestra that it didn't have when I was there back in the day. And one of the reasons they didn't have a screen was there was too much light in that room, so they couldn't accommodate a screen. But things change. And a resurrection brings about a change of appearance. Jesus is not the same Jesus they expected before. And so what they try to pretend to themselves is, okay, well, maybe this is a ghost. Maybe this is too good to be true. Maybe this isn't a real representation of who Jesus is. Maybe it's just a vision of who Jesus might be. And so maybe we don't need to take it seriously. And one of the things that one of the commentaries pointed out to me this week that I've never really thought about before is that in both of the accounts that we read last week and this week, it's different in Mark, but in both of those accounts, it says that Jesus showed them his hands and his feet. And they're not focusing on the woundedness of the hands and the feet. One of the ways that you can tell if it's a ghost or not is if it has feet. You know, ghosts don't normally have feet. They don't walk on the ground. If you look at them closely, they're just kind of floating around. You know, they come in and out of rooms without their feet. But Jesus said, no, I'm real. I'm standing right here in front of you. I'm actually a living, moving being. You can't write me off as a ghost. And so a lot of what this hands and feet thing has to do, this commentator said, you can believe what you want to. But I thought that was interesting, that the focus may not be in these tellings of the story so much on his being wounded as they are on his being real. This Jesus was real. They didn't recognize him at first, but one of the things he wanted them to realize is, yes, but I'm real. This is really who I am. It may not be the part of me that you saw before. It may not be the way you expected me to be. It may not be the ministry that we did together or the times that we spent in the same place. But this is who I am. And this is what I'm revealing to you about myself. Resurrection changes appearances. Next, Jesus asks for something to eat. And he gets a piece of broiled fish. And I can be real irreverent when I'm listening to scripture being read here in the morning. And I thought, well, I wonder if they use lemon pepper or Old Bay. Because everybody knows that broiled fish is better with either one of those items on it than it is by itself. But he asked for something to eat, and they gave him a piece of broiled fish. I would suggest that this is just the beginning of a suggestion that when you experience resurrection, there's a change in relationship. In the past, when Jesus would encounter people or feed people, he did the feeding. You know, when people asked to be fed by the side of the lake, he fed 5,000 in one telling the story and 3,000 in another, but he was the one that came up with the fish. When the disciples were out fishing on the lake and couldn't catch anything, Jesus helped them catch the fish and then said, come and fix some for me. Jesus changes the relationship and says, this time you get to feed me. Now, we also know that ghosts don't generally eat, so we may have wanted them to see, and eat something, but it also begins to shift the relationship, what it is that the disciples will be responsible for. He takes it away from, okay, I'm going to prepare this meal for you, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to be your servant and watch your feet, to a situation where now the disciples are to minister to him, or to do something that is outside of what their wheelhouse has been in the past. They're going to be asked to do something different. He even tells them that they're going to be in charge of forgiving people, that they're going to be in charge of taking care of people's spiritual needs. And then he opens the scriptures to them and really begins to teach them in a different kind of relationship. He's giving them, and I want you to look at the scripture at home, he's beginning to give them really deeper information about what this whole resurrection thing means. Because clearly they were still confused. I think we're still confused today. And he wants them to begin to understand that the fullness of the witness to what he's done and what he will become and what his ministry is about. And I encourage you particularly to take a look at a scripture or a Bible that has some footnotes, because it will take you to some of the Old Testament scriptures that refer to what Jesus is referring to when he says, this is who I am. This is what I came to fulfill. This is what you're seeing in me. Because particularly for this group of disciples, their job was going to become, their relationship was going to become, not just saying, we walked beside Jesus and this is what he told me, but helping other people understand why that was significant for them. Helping other people to take their Jewishness and reconcile it with their Christianity. Helping people to really come into a relationship with this story that, frankly, is kind of unbelievable. And so Jesus' change here is a change in relationship, going from being only teacher to being teacher that's giving them tools that they can use in the world, and then also asking to be cared for. So resurrection means a change in reflection or appearance. Resurrection means a change in relationship. And finally, resurrection is a change in responsibility. The disciples are now called to be feeders. They're called to be servants. They're called to understand enough that they can help others understand. And then Jesus addresses the disciples, and I think it's really interesting. He doesn't say, you will be my witnesses. He doesn't say, please be my witnesses. He doesn't say, consider being my witnesses if you have the time, or if you have the courage, or if you have the skills, or if you've been to seminary, or if you've had the proper training, or if you know what you're talking about. Jesus said, you are my witnesses. You are my witnesses. I think we all want to put these qualifiers on it ourselves, right? Well, I witness to Jesus, but I really don't know enough, so I'll just kind of sit back and let other people, explain it for me. Or I can invite them to church, or at least tell them where the church is and what time they worship. But I'll let the pastor do the explaining, or I'll let the teachers or those, or God, what's worse, I'll tell them to listen to the radio and listen to these radio preachers or television preachers will tell them who Jesus is. But I'm not going to be a witness myself. Jesus said, you are my witnesses. I'm going to step on a couple of toes. You're not only my witnesses when you're talking about me, but you're my witnesses when you're living every day. You're my witnesses when you're out in the world. You're my witnesses when you're having coffee before church. You're my witnesses when you're out on the street. You're my witnesses when you cut somebody off in traffic. You're my witnesses when you get snippy with a service person. You're my witnesses in all these situations. You are my witnesses. You have a responsibility. And we have the same responsibility even though we didn't meet Jesus. The word is not you will be my witnesses, or you can decide on your own whether you're going to be my witnesses or not. You are my witnesses. Resurrection changes our responsibility. We become responsible to make a difference in the world. We cannot live in a situation where poverty and where need is around us and not address it in some way. We cannot live in a situation where the world is not right and not want to right it on our own and not want to do something about it and not want to make a positive difference in the world around us. We have a responsibility. We have a job description. And the job description is, you are my witnesses. Resurrection changes things. Resurrection makes us see things in a different way and makes things appear differently than they've ever appeared before. Resurrection changes our relationship with Christ and with each other. And resurrection changes our responsibility so that we are now expected to begin to live into, or not begin to live into, but to be witnesses of Christ. We're called as witnesses. So in everything that we do, and everything that you do after you leave here today, you are witnesses. You have been given this revelation not by accident, not just as some interesting story that you can talk about over lunch or during the week, but you are witnesses to who Christ is and to what Christ can do in this world. So I encourage you to understand what resurrection has changed for you. Pray with me, please. Holy God, I thank you for your word. I thank you for coming back after your death and resurrection to teach even a little more, to help us to really walk into resurrection and help us experience it on a level that keeps it from being abstract and makes it personal. God, help us be your witnesses in this day and time. Amen.